But I mean, that's how ridiculous it got. I mean, just lie after lie after lie.
In the days following Kendrick Johnson's death, as I think probably happens in the 21st century with any mysterious death, social media was abuzz with speculations, theories, and discussions. Jackie Johnson had a huge social media presence via her Facebook page and a Facebook group she created seeking justice for Kendrick. For example, in one post, Jackie said, quote, "Kendrick Johnson laid on the floor damn near 6 hours while they tampered with his body and then they called up the coroner. #coverup." This information came from Jacksonville-based retired police officer turned private investigator Harold Lee. In reports dated between February 21, 2013 and February 23, 2013, Harold Lee informed the Johnson family that he had collected the following information from witnesses. Here are the entire reports verbatim. The names of the students and parents have been changed to protect their privacy.
Bill Watson is the elected coroner for Lowndes County, Georgia. He's currently serving his second term in that office. Bill Watson stated that on January 11, 2013, he was on the telephone with a GBI agent when the agent asked him what was going on at the county high school. Bill Watson had no idea what was happening at the high school. Around 3:30 p.m. that afternoon, Bill Watson received a telephone call from the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office regarding a death at the Lowndes County High School. When he arrived at the school, he was directed to the old gymnasium. The gym was where the body was located, rolled in a mat lying on the floor. There were several officers from the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office and the Valdosta Police Department present. Numerous individuals were going in and out of the building that was not law enforcement. An investigator for the sheriff's office told him that the boy in the mat had fallen into the mat attempting to retrieve his shoes. Bill noticed that the arms on the body were not stretched above the head, but was down by the side of the body. The entire body was in the mat. Bill Watson told the investigator that he was going to have the body taken to the lab in Macon, Georgia for an autopsy, and that the body would be stored at a local funeral home inside a cooler until Monday. The investigator told Bill Watson that an autopsy was not needed because the death was an accident. The investigator also told Bill that the body should be taken to the city morgue. A detective with the Valdosta Police Department got permission for the body to be stored at their facility. On Monday, Bill Watson had the body transported to the lab in Macon. Bill Watson believes that the body was placed inside the mat. He had the body taken to the lab for an autopsy because he needs a cause of death before he can sign a certificate of death.
Some of this report we know to be true. Watson was not informed about the body in the gym right away. It took about 6 hours. Authorities were allowing people to move about the building after the discovery, and the partial lockdown was lifted before Watson arrived. As we discussed before, Kenyatta Johnson and her friends had made it to Bruce, as we're calling him, for his beatdown before Watson had even arrived on the scene. But we know that KJ was not in the mat when Watson arrived, and his arms were never both at his sides. The rigor mortis affecting his body wouldn't have even allowed them to be repositioned there. As far as the investigator telling Watson an autopsy was not needed, according to the Georgia Investigation Act, the circumstances required a coroner be called to the scene. From there, it is the responsibility of the coroner to arrange transport of the body to the medical examiner, who has sole discretion over whether an autopsy will be performed. Here are some more letters from Harold Lee.
My interview of Joaquin Allen was conducted with the permission and in the presence of his mother, Sarah Allen. On the day Kendrick's body was found at the high school, Joaquin went home early. After he arrived home, Staff Sergeant Jack D. Winningham of the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office came to his home. Joaquin stated he knew nothing of the death, but that he would continue to listen to classmates for any information he could get. My interview of Leo McLean was conducted with the permission and in the presence of his mother, Christina McLean. Leo stated that since the death of Kendrick Johnson, Brian Bell, who is in his first block of classes, has missed a number of days from school and has been very late at other times. Brian has also told some class members that he was at the doctor's when he was absent or late. Brian has also been very quiet around school since Kendrick's death. Ryan Hall, who is a very close friend with Brian Bell, and whose father is employed by the GBI or the FBI, is a weightlifting partner with Leo in their weightlifting class. One day while walking to class after Kendrick's death, Ryan told Leo and several other boys that Brian did not have to worry about getting into trouble for anything he would do wrong because of who his dad is. Leo also stated that he believes Brian Bell and his father may be using steroids to build up their bodies. My interview of Gwen Stone was conducted with the permission and in the presence of her mother, Mandy Stone. Gwen Stone and Kendrick Johnson were friends back in middle school. Gwen remembers a fight between Kendrick and Brian Bell in middle school and 3 other fights they had in high school. Brian Bell's father was some type of assistant coach in football, basketball, and wrestling at the middle school and high school. Brian was involved in all 3 of those sports. Brian's father is employed by the GBI, and his mother may be employed by the FBI. Gwen also stated that Kendrick's body was found in a mat in the old gym by Coach Terry Quinn and 2 students, a white female and a male. After Kendrick's body was found, Gwen left school early and went home with her mother. Staff Sergeant Jack D. Winningham of the Lowndes County Sheriff's Office Criminal Investigation Division came to her home that same day and attempted to interview her without her mother being present.
With regards to this report, Brian's father, Rick Bell, was employed by the FBI, not the GBI, and Karen Bell is not affiliated with either. The students who first saw KJ in the mat were 2 white female students. According to the $100 million lawsuit files, they were the daughters of Superintendent Wes Taylor, and throughout the investigation they are referred to as the Taylor Girls. Coach Terry Quinn is also not the coach who discovered KJ. It was Coach Philip Pipolo.
Steve Owens stated that he was called to the scene of the death around 4:45 p.m. on January 11, 2013. After arriving at the school, he assisted Wilbur Watson by placing a body tag on the right toe of the deceased. He recalls a white or gray sock on the foot and a pair of dark blue jeans on the body. Steve further stated that he transported the body to the Valdosta City morgue that evening and picked it up on Monday and took it to Macon. He returned the body to Valdosta and dropped it off at Harrington Funeral Home. Antonio Harrington was not at the funeral home when he left the body with 3 other employees. Steve also recalls leaving a clear plastic bag with the clothes in it with the funeral home employees. Steve also stated that he left another body at the funeral home at the same time, and the funeral home did recall getting those clothes.
As far as we can find, this is the only place that Owens allegedly says he left a separate plastic bag with the clothes in it at the funeral home. In his affidavit, Owens doesn't mention anything being outside of the body bag between the school and the crime lab and the GBI, or the GBI and the funeral home.
My interview of Amanda Richards was conducted with the permission and in the presence of her mother, Margot Richards. Amanda is friends with another student who has information that a white female student at Lowndes High went to the local office of the GBI in an attempt to tell them about the death of Kendrick Johnson. The student and an adult member of her family were turned away by a person with the GBI without investigating the student's story.
After going over these letters, basically we know some of it is true, some of it is untrue, and some of it we couldn't find proof of one way or another. However, most of the information here came from the high school students. High school students aren't necessarily the most reliable witnesses, and it was reckless to provide this kind of information to grieving parents with an agenda and a platform. Social media became a huge influence in this case. David Whitley, a journalist, had this to say about it.
They all were getting death threats, on social media. And in talking to other people up there who would just defend them, on social media, they were immediately attacked on social media. Gosh, I remember talking to, a waitress there who posted stuff on Facebook, defending Brian Bell, and the social media mob just started attacking her, and then they made an issue of it with her employer, and she ended up she was fired because the employer said, look, I'm just catching too much grief here from these people. They're hurting my business, the fact you worked here. So it became it's almost this zero tolerance policy. Anybody who would defend Brian Bell, the social media mob would just set on him with pitchforks, and the division that it caused in that town, which was just striking at that point.
The amount of misinformation being spread through social media was mind-boggling. On our Patreon, you will find several screenshots, several of which show likes, shares, comments, etc., that blatantly spread completely false information. Rumors that KJ was missing not only his organs, but also his penis, that KJ had been raped or gang raped, that Taylor Eakin had not only been in a sexual relationship with KJ, but that she had given birth to a baby and didn't know whether the father was Brian or KJ. Some of them are laughably wild, but others are just plain ignorant. For example, positional asphyxia was represented as being a term that a medical examiner uses when they're just not sure. If you listen to our episodes on the history in Valdosta, you'll remember we talked about vagrancy and how it was a catch-all term for whatever the arresting officer's personal motives were. Positional asphyxia is not such a term. There are very specific requirements that must be met, and it is an exceptionally rare case of death. A catch-all term, such as cardiac arrest, would be among the top causes of death. The other piece of misinformation, which I wouldn't necessarily qualify as ignorance, but it's definitely a misconception, is that positional asphyxia only affects babies. Regrettably, I couldn't find any reliable statistics on the rate of positional asphyxia in adults versus babies, but rough estimates put it at around only 10% of positional asphyxia deaths occur in adults. The majority of them are the result of an accident, most often when alcohol is a factor. In the show notes, I will provide links to 2 medical journal papers on adult positional asphyxia, one of which provides an explanation of how it works in a very easy-to-understand way for people without medical training, and the other, which summarizes 30 cases between 1982 and 1990, and provides photographs which I think are very valuable to the research. If you still find yourself confused about positional asphyxia at this point, I highly recommend you take a few minutes to read them. They're both short reads. We've also gone into deeper dives on 2 cases of positional asphyxia on our Patreon side stories. The first is the death of John Jones. Jones was a 26-year-old father and medical student that died from positional asphyxia after being trapped in a crevice of the Nutty Putty Cave in Utah in 2009. Despite extensive rescue efforts, Jones spent 27 hours in a partially inverted position before losing consciousness and passing away shortly after. They were unable to retrieve his body after his death, and he was sealed in the Nutty Putty Cave when it was closed to the public for good. The second is the death of Kyle Plush, which I find to be the most disturbingly similar case. Plush was a 16-year-old high school student and athlete that became trapped upside down when a storable third-row bench seat in his family's 2004 Honda Odyssey flipped onto him while he was reaching over it for, wait for it, a tennis shoe. Plush was unable to move but managed to call 911 on his phone using the voice commands twice. Dispatch was unable to locate Plush, and he unfortunately died due to positional asphyxia. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, how come Jones lived 27 hours and Plush lived long enough to call 911 twice? In both of those cases, there was airflow. Jones was also given oxygen, water, and electrolytes by the rescue team while he was trapped. There was no airflow between KJ's head and the gym floor, meaning he would have died within minutes. Social media posts also led me to the false belief that KJ had been burned with acid. If you look at the photos of KJ's face and neck in the crime lab, you can see there are several areas where the skin looks just like peeling paint. Proponents of a cover-up believe this indicates the use of acid or some other chemical peel to hide evidence of trauma consistent with a beating. What this actually is a natural process of decomposition called skin slippage. We spoke to Lee Touchton about this, who spoke to the people at the crime lab.
What they did say was that there was skin slippage, and this is an advanced type of decomposition that happens when a body is decomposing rapidly in an enclosed space without a lot of air around it. And in fact, when I talked to the funeral director, he said the same thing. He said, we call them fistulas. And he said he tried to explain to Mrs. Johnson what that was. It was not a place where the skin had been burned. So once again, I think that a lot of the outrage from the state of Kendrick's body was promoted out there by people who had no understanding of medicine, science, or what happens to a dead body in an upside-down position.
Claims of the body being cooked is something we will get into in a little bit. Getting back to the case at hand, the social media seeds of gossip were then sown into the Ebony magazine series on Kendrick Johnson, written by Fred Rosen, and reaped on a national level. As I mentioned in episode 1, it was so egregiously false and inflammatory that the publishing company Johnson Publishing, the magazine, and the author were slapped with a lawsuit that bankrupted Johnson Publishing, and the articles have been completely scrubbed from existence on the internet. It is amazing we were able to find copies. We will get into a major plot line in the articles in our next episode, but that is just one of several. We've created a second series just about the Ebony articles we have available on our Patreon, and we highly recommend that if you're enjoying this podcast, you listen to it because it really elevates the nuances surrounding this case. We also have case files, photos, videos, and countless other pieces from this case available, as well as ad-free versions of all of our episodes available on any tier. Our patrons help make it so we can continue to produce and release content with our high standards and keeps it at the top of your feeds. So thank you in advance for your support. The contents of the Ebony articles were then broadcast on national network CNN. Not everyone uses social media and not everyone reads magazines, but everyone at some point or another watches or follows the news. We played several clips of the CNN coverage in episode 1, but that was such a small fraction of what CNN actually reported on this case. It was sensational for them, a ratings dream, but only as a murder. David Whitley, a journalist we spoke to, had this to say on the media around this case.
If you knew nothing about the case and you were sitting in a dentist office in Buffalo, New York, and just happen to pick up an Ebony and you kill it, and while you're waiting on your appointment and you start reading this, you might come like, wow, this is weird. And plus, if you don't really know much about how journalism and how there are certain rules as far as libel, but you come away thinking, man, I don't know, who's this Brian Bell kid, blah blah, but they just, they were, let's say they deserve to go out of business based on that story alone. But it does feed into this whole thing that says well, it was in a national magazine that he killed him, and it just adds to this pseudo evidence against him.
In 2021, documentarian Jason Pollock released Finding Kendrick Johnson. The film chronicled the events following KJ's disappearance with a blatantly anti-Bell agenda. Aside from being horribly biased, the information provided by the filmmaker, narrator, and participants is completely incorrect. Documentarians are taught and expected to abide by a code of ethics in their filmmaking. To quote from the Complete Guide to Ethical Storytelling for Documentary Filmmakers, published by the Documentary Film Academy, quote, "Documentary ethics act as a filmmaker's guiding lights, ensuring movies tell the truth, treat people with respect, and consider their impact on viewers. Key areas include truth and accuracy, where facts form the foundation for an honest portrayal of events. Fair representation means letting subjects speak for themselves without manipulation in storytelling or editing." End quote. In the spirit of that doctrine, we want to correct the identifiable falsities in the film. If you happen to have seen it or want to follow along, we will move in chronological order. In the film, Jackie Johnson said that she told Officer Roby that her children knew they were supposed to be home by 10 p.m. on a school night. In her official statement, she said they were supposed to be home by 11:30 p.m. Her official statement is available on Patreon. For this episode, whatever corrections we provide here, the proof will be on our Patreon public feed for this episode. The narrator, actress Jennifer Lewis, says that KJ had 19-inch shoulders, and the matte opening was only 14 inches. Kenneth Johnson was actually the first person to say that KJ had 19-inch shoulders. As far as we know, Dr. Anderson was the only one to actually measure KJ's shoulders. He never released his photos, but we have a still image from an investigative series that interviewed Dr. Anderson showing them being measured. The photo is not great quality, in fact it's downright unclear, but Dr. Anderson states the shoulders are 16 inches.
You can see it starts here and goes across, and that is 16 inches. Well, that's bigger than the hole.
Yeah.
So there's essentially no way he's going to get into that gym mat through that hole.
Dr. Anderson also appears in Finding Kendrick Johnson. The documentary played a clip from CNN, which reported that the size 9.5 Adidas shoe found at the bottom of the mat did not have any blood on it to support Kenneth's statement that the DOJ told him the shoe was planted on top of the pool of blood. The shoe did have blood, both on the bottom and inside, out of view of the crime scene photo CNN plastered everywhere. The reason there was no blood on the top in the photo is because, while the body was purging, the blood and fluids dripped onto the ground near the shoe, which then pooled around the shoe. The shoe was not directly under any of KJ's orifices to be dripped on. Take a closer look at the crime scene photo and the blood inside is visible. Kenneth says the body cooler was hot and that Kendrick's body was being heated. In some recordings, he used the term cooked. He stated that when he was allowed to view KJ's body, he felt a blast of warm air like when you open an oven when the mortuary freezer was opened.
Right here in this crime lab, the Valdosta crime lab, we was here. And they want me to believe that I didn't see what I seen. They want me to believe that this cooler right here in this crime lab was not on warm. This, you heard it from me, I seen it with my eyes. It was me, Scribe Jones, Jane Thornton, and Willingham. We was inside this building. I seen what I seen, and they know I seen what I seen. If Kendrick was stored properly, why was this cooler warm? That Kendrick body showed his body like it went in different stages. If he was stored properly, it ain't no way that his body should have done that. 19 hours, Kendrick turned like that. It's looked and he's fried, crispy, and burnt. That shouldn't happen. We will fight for the truth of what happened to my son. We will continue to fight them no matter what they try, no matter what they do. We will stand, and we will stand firmly against the wrongdoing of this time. This is supposed to be a professional building for the people, and it's not, because it was some wrongdoing inside of this building. And I'm not going by hearsay. I'm going by what I seen with my eyes. And for these devils to try and convince us otherwise, it will not happen. We will fight you no matter what it takes. It is a cold in here before we stop.
Lee Touchton can provide more information on the crime lab.
I went to the crime lab. I did not go in the body cooler area, but I looked at all of the logs. I looked at the machinery, the alarms, the backup generators, things like that. And I spoke to several different people in the crime lab. I did not open a body cooler drawer, so I can't speak to what Kenneth says. It was Kenneth. Kenneth Johnson says that hot air came out of it. And he and Jackie Johnson have both said that the crime lab cooked, and that is the word they used, cooked their son's body to hide evidence. Well, the crime lab is accredited, and I believe it had 2 or 3 different accreditation agencies at that point in time. And what an accreditation agency does is it sends teams of outside inspectors to come and make sure that everything is being run properly. And this crime lab serves all of South Georgia. So there's lots of different departments down here that have used it. And nobody has ever made that claim that Kenneth Johnson stated. And in both of the autopsies, there was no evidence presented in their reports that the flesh had been boiled or cooked.
Mortuary freezers, otherwise known as body coolers or fridges, are required to have certain fail-safes pre-built into them during manufacturing to protect the sensitive cargo inside. These fail-safes include high-temperature alarms, low-temperature alarms, sensor failure alarms, door open alarms, electricity failure alarms, low backup battery alarms, and low-voltage alarms. When these alarms sound, they do so with a buzzer, a flashing light, and on more recent models, a remote signal alarm. If the body cooler was hot, these fail-safes would have been alerting, and it's unlikely they would allow anyone in, as they would require the room clear for maintenance people to fix the issue immediately. Now, the following isn't exactly false information, but it implies something that needs to be cleared up. Kenneth said that when the body bag was opened, KJ's arm was up and over his head. That was true. Jason Pollock responded sympathetically, "They didn't even put his arm down?" This makes it sound like the people who handled the body were somehow vindictive for not making the body more presentable before allowing the family to see it. The body would have been in rigor mortis when it was placed into the body bag, as we discussed in episode 2. As we discussed in episode 1, the body bag was not supposed to be opened until it reached the medical examiner, who is the only person authorized to reposition the body for investigation and autopsy. KJ would have looked more presentable if the family hadn't seen him until he was at the funeral home, which, as hard as it would be for a parent, is the way it should have been. In episode 1, we talked about the protests outside the Lowndes County Courthouse when the Johnson family was arrested for blocking the door. This protest introduced the use of signs and t-shirts displaying a photo of KJ post-mortem. The face looks swollen, warped, and very gruesome. In the film, Jackie said she put the photo of KJ back into the public to, quote, give that back to the people that did that to him. Pastor Leroy Henderson Jr. addresses this from the perspective of a local in the Unfortunate documentary.
Having been privy to the autopsy photos, even photos going back to when he was still inside the mat, initially it was clear who the face belonged to. It was that of Kendrick Johnson. That is at the discovery of the body. Even after the initial medical examination and autopsy, it was still clear that this was Kendrick Johnson. Distorted to a degree, yes. But something happened post that examination and the poster that was put on display downtown. There was much damage to the body.
The photo of KJ was taken after the first autopsy had been performed, but before he was brought to the funeral home, who would be responsible for post-mortem restoration. Be warned, this next bit is quite unpleasant. An autopsy in a case like this, where there is a reason to check for signs of a homicide, involves full degloving of the face, which is peeled off of the musculature underneath to check for subcutaneous injuries. KJ's face did not look like that after being removed from the mat. The person that, quote, did that to him was the medical examiner. Signs and t-shirts were also made with that photo next to a post-mortem photo of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy who was brutally lynched in 1955. The film perpetuates this parallel, specifically targeting the Bells while doing so. On our Patreon, we have uploaded several side story episodes to provide context for case references like this one. If you find yourself curious, go ahead, pause now. You can listen to our episode on Emmett Till for more details on that horrific case. Fair warning, it is absolutely heart-wrenching. We sat down and spoke to Thomas Aiello, a professor of history, Africana studies, and anthrozoology, who provided this summary of the Emmett Till case and the effect that it had on civil rights. I do want to make it very clear again that Professor Aiello's views do not reflect the views of anyone at this podcast or vice versa. We spoke to him specifically as a reliable source on Valdosta, as well as Black history in general, not about Kendrick Johnson. If you don't like what we have to say, that's completely fine, but do not go and hassle him about our views simply because he was kind enough to lend us his time. Thank you so much.
Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy from Chicago. And of course, Chicago is an incredibly violent place in its own right. And because of that, he and his family were products of the Great Migration, wherein from the 1890s through 1955, when Emmett Till was killed, millions of Black Southerners left the South and went somewhere else, usually to northern urban industrial hubs like Chicago to take jobs. And so even though Emmett Till was from Chicago, his family was from Mississippi, the small town of Money, Mississippi. He was sent back to his family's hometown, Money, Mississippi, in order to avoid the violence of Chicago over the course of the summer when he wasn't in school. One of the great ironies of the whole Emmett Till case. And in this regard, his contact with a white woman here in this situation wasn't sexual contact, but it was contact nonetheless. As a 14-year-old Black boy, he goes into the local store in Money, Miss. There is only one store. It's Money, Mississippi. It's a very small place. And he says something to the lady behind the counter, nothing offensive or anything like that, but not deferential the way she would expect a Black Southern boy to speak to her. And of course, Emmett Till, in Chicago, you can say whatever you want to anybody. It's Chicago. It's a relatively, in many ways, civilized place. That's not the way it is here. She is offended, and not only is she the checkout woman at the store, but she is also very much the wife of the owner of the store. And so he and his brother-in-law, her brother-in-law, go out, they kidnap Emmett Till, and they torture him. They finally kill him. They tie his body to a cotton gin fan and dump it in the river, where it stays submerged for several days before it is finally discovered. It was a shock to the nation, not because it was rare. It wasn't rare. The number of Black teenage boys who were killed in Mississippi over the course of the previous 50 years had been multiple. We don't know about them, though, because white Mississippi always covered it up. The difference with this case is that Emmett Till wasn't a local, that he was from Chicago. And his mother, of course, obviously distraught and obviously very frustrated because she sent him down there specifically to avoid danger. And she is determined to make him a household name. She has the body sent back to Chicago and tells the embalmer not to do anything to him. And you can imagine if when you sit in the bathtub too long and your fingers get all pruny and funny, you can imagine what a human body looks like after being submerged in water for days on end. He didn't look even human, really. And she held for him an open casket public funeral and had every news media outlet in the country take pictures, and thousands upon thousands of people came, white, Black, and otherwise. That picture, the picture of his yearbook photo and a picture of his body as it lay in that casket, was on the front page of every newspaper in the country and most of them around the world. And it highlighted the situation that existed in the South in the way that no one had ever really thought about before. They thought that with the end of slavery, that they were somehow, that the South still it sucks and it's racist, but I mean, it's not as bad as it used to be. This was kind of a wake-up call that said, oh, no, wait, it's still super bad. You know, I mean, remember, in 1955, when Emmett Till happens, the year prior, we had just gotten Brown versus Board of Education, which had desegregated public schools in the South. By the time of Emmett Till's death, no school districts had actually desegregated. They had all defied all those orders. The white South was showing its ass in kind of all of these different racial ways. And this was just like the exclamation point on a particularly violent sentence. And Mississippi is so chastened by all of this publicity that they actually do go and arrest the guys who do it. And they do put them on trial. But a trial in Mississippi in 1955 is a trial in front of 12 white dudes who you went to high school with. So the fix was in from the beginning. When you have all white juries in Mississippi, because there was no voting rights, there was also no Black jury pool. So you know you're going to have an all white jury. And so they were acquitted relatively easily. But they kept the story going because after knowing the double jeopardy laws in the United States and that you cannot be tried for the same crime twice, after they were acquitted, they gave an interview to Look magazine, which was the most popular weekly news magazine in the country at the time, very much admitting to killing Emmett Till and not apologizing. You can't touch us now. This is the way we do it in Mississippi. And that provided this whole other shock to the country, that not only do they do it, they just openly admit it. They don't care or anything like that. And so, and it's no coincidence that that happens in the summer of 1955 The Montgomery bus boycott, which really kicks off the civil rights movement, starts in December of 55. I mean, that's not a coincidence. I mean, the death of Emmett Till is going to be responsible, and the publicity after it really is going to be responsible for kickstarting the entirety of the civil rights movement.
To draw any kind of comparison between the horrific torture, murder, and desecration of a 14-year-old boy over what amounted to be nothing, and what happened to Kendrick Johnson, even if it was a murder in the way the Johnsons believe it was, a fight over a girl, a fight leading to death with a single blow, dramatically belittles what Emmett Till and any other victim of lynching actually went through. Add to that the use of a misleading post-autopsy photo to strengthen that comparison, and add to that comparing the Bells, who have been inarguably exonerated, to the racist scumbags that killed Emmett Till. I know it sounds like I'm saying murder is impossible, but unexplainable things happen all the time, and I'm sure at least some small fraction of them are murder. I didn't see KJ die, and there are 3 minutes of unaccounted for time in that corner of the gym that anything could have happened in. What I'm saying is, if it was murder, it wasn't the Bells. That has been proven. And if I was willing to concede it might have been the Bells, the so-called witness statements from high school gossip never implicated race as a motive. Emmett Till was killed out of pure, unfiltered hatred of his race as a whole. Jennifer Lewis says, quote, "The authorities did not investigate Kendrick's death. I could provide pages of documents disputing that, but I think our previous episodes provide enough rebuttal for that statement. There are some specific points that were brought up with regards to the investigation, though. Jackie says that the blood on the south wall of the gym was never tested. As we mentioned in episode 2, the blood, which was determined to predate the death by quite a long while, was tested against KJ's DNA and found not to be a match." Kenyatta Johnson says if KJ was reaching for a shoe, why was the shoe on top of him? This is one question that was resolved pretty much immediately after KJ was found. One of the students told Sergeant Mike Adams about how the mats were used for gym shoe storage before the official interviews had even started. KJ was reaching for his gym shoes at the bottom of the mat while he was wearing his regular shoes. Lydia Tooley, Jackie's sister, questions why KJ didn't have any shoes on his feet, but his shoes were in the mat. There is no one agreed upon explanation for why his shoes were off and positioned where they were behind his legs. However, the most common theory from the people that we spoke to who were on the scene was that while he was attempting to free himself from the mat, or possibly in an attempt to get the attention of someone nearby, KJ violently kicked hard enough to kick his shoes off, but he was too deep in the mat for them to clear the top of the mat, so they fell into the area with the most open space, which was behind his legs. Jackie stated KJ's legs were, quote, twisted in the mat. This is just factually incorrect. They don't look unnatural at all. You can see the crime scene photos and the crime scene video, which may provide a better perspective for yourself on our Patreon. The documentary showed a news clip of Victor Blackwell, CNN's lead investigator for the Kendrick Johnson case, talking about how students had used the mats to store their gym shoes for a long time and simply tipped the mats to tuck their shoes under or pull them out. Pollock posed the question, why then did KJ climb into the mat instead of tipping it over? Crime scene photos resolved this pretty clearly, but Stride Jones also provided an explanation.
So there again, the mat that contained the shoes prior to Christmas break most likely was on the outside of the stack. But just before Christmas break, the coaches had the students roll all the mats up and push them up in that corner. So now the mat which contained the shoes that was originally on the outside of the stack is now in the middle somewhere. So it's surrounded. So he could not have went up there and just tilted it over like he had been doing and the other students had been doing.
Mitch Creedle, a detective from Washington called in by Michael Moore after the FBI informed him they were no longer going to be involved in his, quote, witch hunt, offers his opinion on why KJ ending up in the mat is preposterous, and the medical examiner should have left it undetermined, as there was not enough information to make a determination on cause of death. The autopsy technician and death investigator we spoke to, who has requested to remain anonymous, had this to say.
Autopsy findings and circumstantial evidence are used to determine cause of death all the time. There was no evidence of trauma or foul play. He was found upside down in a mat. It's not exactly rocket science to infer that how he was found played a significant role in his death. Lots of pathologists would love a chance to throw their 2 cents if they thought it meant solving a potential murder, especially with the idea that was a good, wholesome black kid in the South. It's an easy narrative, but it's just crickets from the pathology community.
After discussing the fight between Brian and KJ on the bus to a football game the year before, the documentary shows an artist's rendition of KJ in the back of a police car, hands behind his back, looking up at a police officer who is standing outside the open car door. It looks like the moment after a criminal is ushered into a vehicle, but before the officer has closed the door. This photo will be on the Patreon public feed for anyone who wants to see it, and you should. It is very inflammatory. If you recall, Brian and KJ were not allowed to ride the bus home due to the zero-tolerance policy about violence the school had in place. Brian was driven home by his parents, but KJ was escorted home in a police car. The image implies, without stating as much, that the escort home KJ received from a police officer after the football game was a punishment. The officer who drove KJ home, Shirley Demps, had a good relationship with KJ, and she had offered him a ride home as a friend. He sat in the front of the police car, laughing and talking with her the whole way home, according to her recollection.
Yes, that is correct. Shirley. I can't think of her last name, but she was very kind, very professional, and what she told me made perfect sense, that it was a lot safer for Kendrick to ride home with her than to, quote, try to find his own way home. And the only reason that Brian Bell rode home with his parents is because they were there at the game, and Kendrick Johnson's parents were not. And I'm not faulting his parents for not being there. It was pretty far away. But the rules about the bus are the rules, and they applied equally to both kids. They both had to find their own way home. And she offered to take Kendrick. And he said they listened to music. He rode in the front seat. That was a lie that Jason Pollock put in his film. I think he had a schematic showing Kendrick in the back seat like he was arrested as a detainee, and that is not at all true.
Mitch Creedle says that he spoke with a witness that told him Rick Bell was following her, intimidating her, and showing up at her work. Does that sound familiar? That's because that witness was Aaliyah Griffin. And as we discussed in our Red Herrings episode, her statement clearly said, in black and white, that the individual who was harassing her and showing up at her work was Ryan Hall's father, not Rick Bell. She never mentioned Rick Bell at all. With regards to witnesses, Lydia Tooley states several people have come forward with the truth, who were then locked up or silenced. We discussed these people as well. Ryan Anthony Domek Hernandez, for example, was locked up for trying to break into his ex-girlfriend's house, which he only failed to do because he cut himself severely in the process. And of course, Lupe Williams, who extorted money from the Johnsons in exchange for a clearly fabricated audio confession. Jackie made it sound as though Hernandez was held on bogus charges for months and only released when he recanted his statement. However, he recanted his statement almost immediately because he was asked to submit to a polygraph, and he spent months in prison, which I really want to stress is a light sentence for stalking and terrorizing a woman just because she doesn't like you anymore, which is a legitimate crime. Dr. Anderson said in the film that his determination that the cause of death could not possibly be positional asphyxia was based on a lack of fluid in the lungs. During inversion, the victim will begin to struggle to breathe. The longer they struggle to breathe, the harder the lungs have to work. The heart will begin to fail, and the combination of these circumstances will lead to a buildup of fluid in the lungs. So, he asserts, in order for KJ to have died from positional asphyxia, he would have had to have fluid in his lungs. There are a couple of problems with this, the first being that his statement about there being no fluid in the lungs comes from his review of the initial autopsy report. Remember, the organs were lost before they even reached Dr. Anderson. He never saw the lungs. The second is that Dr. Gaffney Kraft, in her report, went over the requirements for positional asphyxia that needed to be met, along with the citation to the medical journals on the subject. All 3 of those requirements were met. Fluid in the lungs was not one of them. Our anonymous autopsy source had this to say.
I mean, when he has no way to actually prove his own findings, then of course he'd say something that's equally baseless to try and throw shade on the original exam. It's kind of like saying that someone has to have water in their lungs for a case to be ruled a drowning, which also isn't true. Hack.
Speaking of needing the lungs, in the film, Mitch Creedle stated that the organs are always returned to the body after autopsy. The organs will be placed in a bag, which is then placed into the chest cavity until the body reaches the funeral home. Typically, they will be disposed of by the funeral home, but in cases where the family wants the body buried with those organs for religious or other reasons, they will be placed into the casket before it is buried, but they won't be put back into the body. The body will be stuffed as part of the restoration process, typically with cotton, but we've heard of homes using sawdust or, in this case, newspaper. There are no laws with regards to what material can be used to fill a body. There are best practices, but there is nothing suspicious or illegal about stuffing a body with newspaper. Another source of confusion with regards to the conspiracy theory is that there is a letter from Coroner Wilbur Watson written in support of the Harrington Funeral Home for their defense against the Johnsons' lawsuit, which states, quote,
"In this case, the viscera, which is the internal organs, were not sent back with the body for disposition, in other words, disposal. It was confirmed by Mr. Rodney Bryan, who was present at the autopsy, that the viscera were disposed of due to decomposition of the same."
It was later clarified by Rodney Bryan that what he had communicated to the funeral home as well as Watson was that the vitreous, or the gel-like fluid in the eyes that is used for toxicology samples, was disposed of after testing. With regards to Mitch Creedle, all we really have to say is that he is not wrong, but Harrington Funeral Home settled out of court with the Johnsons over this in mid-2019. It's no longer suspicious. A funeral home employee disposed of them, likely incinerated, by mistake. A little bit more on the autopsy, the documentary plays a clip from CNN that called the abrasions on KJ's fingers defensive wounds. To review the initial autopsy report, he had 2 cutaneous abrasions on his right hand and 1 on his left. Neither was significant enough to have caused bleeding. In fact, my interpretation of the one on his right hand was that it was a hangnail, but I'm not an expert. A forensic pathologist is thoroughly trained on how to identify defensive wounds during their education. I read a paper on defensive wounds published in the Egyptian Journal of Forensic Sciences in 2013. A 5-year study of 5,697 autopsies, 189 of which were declared homicidal deaths, examined patterns in defensive wounds. The study showed that only 15% of males in the 15 to 29 age range showed any signs of having fought back. Of those that did, 52% of them showed incised wounds or wounds caused by a sharp implement that would have bled excessively. Of those who were determined to have been bludgeoned, which was 34%, almost all of them had defensive wounds in the form of abrasions or bruising on their forearms or wrists, but not their hands. As the authors state at the end of their paper, a, quote, meticulous examination should be done before designating an injury as a defensive wound. Misidentification of defensive wounds, a key indicator in many homicide cases, can lead to a miscarriage of justice. To my knowledge, none of the pathologists involved in this case designated the abrasions on his hands as defensive wounds, not even Dr. Anderson. The documentary spent a fair amount of time reviewing the security footage collected from the school, drawing attention to the scattered timestamps, apparent cuts, and the lack of fluidity between frames. That is all fact. However, it isn't evidence of doctoring, as they are claiming it is. There is an explanation for all of this when you understand how the school's surveillance system worked. The system was made up of 4 different systems jury-rigged to work in tandem. The systems were of different ages, made by different manufacturers, and operated in different ways. If you've ever tried to save money by using a third-party part on a brand-name construct, you've most likely experienced the reduction in performance. In its tenure, the surveillance system would have had problems and then been fixed in the most affordable ways possible on a public school budget, resulting in this Frankenstein-esque smattering of different machines. As parts of the systems experienced downtime and were not corrected once they were up and running again, the discrepancies grew between the timestamps. Over time, every camera in the school ended up with different timestamps. It was determined that one camera did have a correct timestamp, but it was not one of the ones near the old gym. CNN was really a driving force behind the conspiracy surrounding the surveillance. In episode 1, we played an interview that Grant Fredericks, a well-respected expert, did with CNN, where the overall tone of the conversation was that they found the footage suspicious. We're going to play that interview again, but this time without any of the leading questions from Victor Blackwell, and you can form your own opinions on whether or not you think he seems to think the evidence has been intentionally tampered with.
Those files are not original files. They're not something that an investigator should rely on for the truth of the video. Well, the timestamp is in another stream of video, so you have to be able to access it using special codecs. So you have to really know where to find it, but it's there. Once the timestamp is located, you can then begin to make sense of it and begin to track people. The motion video that we're looking at here and the fact that we skip time periods when there's no motion is very common. So I'm not really concerned about that part of it. Yeah, this has not been intentionally blurred. This is likely, the camera itself has probably been hit and the lens has been pushed out of focus for some reason. If you look very closely, you can see the defined lines that are inherent in digital video. Those lines are still intact, so they have not been blurred. Therefore, it was actually the lens that's blurred. The blurriness actually has the defined lines. So this is clearly just a blurred lens. But this video is not the best evidence. It's been changed and altered so that we are missing information, and what we have been provided is not the best quality. Those files are not original files. They're not something that an investigator should rely on for the truth of the video. They've been altered in a number of ways, primarily in image quality, and likely in dropped information loss. There are also a number of files that are corrupted because they've not been processed correctly and they're not playable. So I can't say why they were done that way, but they were not done correctly and they were not done thoroughly. So we're missing information. Right now what they've done is they have left it up to the school district to define what it is they want to provide the police. And I think that probably is a mistake. So the investigator's responsibility is to acquire the entire digital video recording system and then have their staff define what they want to obtain. You don't want somebody who might be party to the responsibility to make the decision as to what they provide the police. There is a whole of time where none of the cameras provide any record that I've been provided. There are 4 cameras in the gym that records motion from when the lights turn on in the morning until when the lights are turned off at night, except for the area of interest. I would absolutely expect there to be some record of that activity, and we don't have any here. I can't tell you whether there was no information recorded in the digital video system, or whether somebody made an error and didn't capture it, or whether somebody just didn't provide it. Investigators are always suspicious and should be suspicious, and it's suspicious that that time period is not there. So yes, I would be suspicious. And until I have the digital video system in my hand, until I can say, or an investigator can say, everything is intact, this was what's recorded, I would still be highly suspicious of this.
Fredericks does bring up a good point. Without looking at the originals, it is not possible to determine whether the video was altered or not. As we mentioned in a previous episode, one of the bigger flaws in this investigation is that the authorities did not get a warrant and collect the hard drives immediately. Given that the death took place on school grounds, and therefore if a crime had been committed, the school could have been implicated, the police should have the wherewithal to consider the possibility that by leaving the originals in the possession of the school and accepting copies, they leave an opening for the footage to be doctored. And even if a crime had not been committed, the school was negligent in this case. Those mats are manufactured with large warning stickers instructing that they never be stored vertically, probably for the exact reason that someone could become trapped in them. A common misconception that's been perpetuated on this topic is that there is about an hour of missing footage leading into the gym, leading up to KJ's death. It is accurate that there is no footage of the gym for that hour, but it's not missing. There were no classes in the old gym during that hour, and the only time students were in the old gym was when they were walking through it. The old gym provided a bridge between two hallways in the school and was a useful shortcut between classes. There are 4 cameras in the gym, and all of these cameras are motion activated. There are 2 possible ways these cameras could trigger recording, depending on the age, make, and model. Option A, the cameras are programmed to begin recording when a certain threshold of pixels detects a change in color within a period of time. It's fast, fractions of a second. The sensitivity determines what that threshold is. A camera programmed with the highest sensitivity may trigger with seemingly no reason, like a bird flew past a window 100 feet away, slightly altering the shadow in the room for a split second. Cameras with low sensitivity would not trigger unless there was a large presence in the field of view, like a vehicle instead of a person. Unless they had a reason to change it, the school cameras were likely left at a default, or medium sensitivity, which would match up with the recording habits we've learned they had. Option B, there is a field of view within the camera scope, called a tripwire, which begins recording when there is motion detected in it. The tripwire for the cameras included everything in the center of the camera's view, but not the peripherals. Someone walking along the gym wall to get to the other door, for example, would not trigger recording, but someone crossing the gym floor would. A source we spoke to that has extensive knowledge on security cameras also mentioned that cameras of a certain age with motion detection have also proven finicky about triggering recording when the motion moves through the tripwire too fast. Another thing to note about these cameras is that they are not video cameras. They are motion image sensors. There's no fluidity in the playback because a motion image sensor takes a still photograph every 1 second, which are then played in quick succession, resulting in jumps. A person can move surprisingly far in 1 second. For example, when KJ is seen crossing the gym to head for the mats, there are 5 total students seen in the background at the same time KJ was seen in the gym. They are passing through the gym as a shortcut. And when they exit, frames were captured by the camera outside the gym door, showing the middle 3 students exiting the gym. But the first student and the last student in the line are not seen. That is because in between the frames, the first and last student moved through the field of view during the 1 second delay. However, the students can be clearly identified as the same students in the gym from the clothes that they were wearing. To see this in action, take a moment to watch the video on our public Patreon feed titled Kendrick Johnson's Final Walk. Now stay with me here on this. This is the point where even I said, oh come on. This is pushing the bounds of possibility. There is simply no way. But there was a way, and we'll get through this together. One of the cameras in the gym provided coverage of the south wall, where the wrestling mats were stored. In a predictable world, this would be the camera that ended the investigation the day it began. But 1 year before the death of KJ Johnson, a rogue basketball struck the camera, pushing it downward and knocking the lens out of focus, restricting the field of view to the area on the floor in front of the mats. Now you promised you'd stay with me. The impact of the basketball was recorded, and the footage was found on the school hard drives, which were reviewed, and the date and time determined to be February 13th, 2012 at 12:27 p.m. This information is in the case file along with the video and the still shots. Now I know this was a lot about what the cameras can and can't and didn't and don't do, but they did do something that isn't always acknowledged and definitely wasn't acknowledged in the documentary. They captured enough for authorities to put together a clear timeline of KJ's final walk and record how long it took for other students to enter the gym after he was left in there alone. The next time the camera was triggered was about 3 minutes later. How, in a school of 4,000 students with a 3-minute window, did 3 teenage boys beat, murder, and hide Kendrick Johnson without leaving any evidence behind? I tried my best to explain the cameras as clearly as I could, but in case you're still scratching your head, I will leave a link in the show notes for a detailed report published in the Valdosta Daily Times about how the camera footage worked. The last unethical aspect of the documentary is that the bells are blasted, shown in video clips, and never spoken to. The Bells have been exonerated in every investigation mounted against them, and the first exoneration should have been enough. It had been proven the Bells were absolutely nowhere near where KJ was found when he had to have died. On November 22, 2022, the Bells filed a lawsuit against Jason Pollock, as well as 3 production companies involved in the production of Finding Kendrick Johnson. The report stated that the Bells were seeking monetary damages for false and defamatory statements and false imputation of criminal conduct which endangered their safety. Only Rick, Brian, and Brandon are named under the complaints, but Karen is included on the lawsuit as a plaintiff. The defendants were accused of benefiting financially by exploiting the mysterious death of a teenager and insinuating that the Bells were modern-day equivalents of the people who brutally murdered Emmett Till. An example of this was drawing the parallel between the murderer brothers of Till, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam, and Brian and Brandon. Another example was comparing the alleged impropriety of Till's interaction with the white wife of Roy Bryant, Carolyn Bryant, which is what incited the lynch mob, to the alleged love triangle with Taylor Eakin. All of the exculpatory evidence exonerating the Bells, which was absent from the film, is detailed in the complaint, demonstrating that the opinions and insinuations expressed in the film are wholly false. The report contains an itemized list of false information about the Bells perpetuated in the film, followed by an explanation about why that item is provably false. The document also briefly covers the consequences the film has had for the Bells, including professional disgrace for Rick, death threats, loss of personal relationships, and difficulty in finding employment for the Bell boys despite being qualified. The document closes by demanding a trial by jury. As of now, the lawsuit is moving through the legal system with no updates, but we will release updates as they come out. David Whitley talked about a protest in Atlanta and how CNN, Ebony, and Googleable Media inspired buses full of people to travel in for it.
Just at the walking into the football stadium, that I guess where they have the thing, there are protesters there, and the thing, and Lee touched and mentioned this so much of this wasn't, really was from out of towners, in Atlanta, that they would just bust people in to protest. So I'm just guessing here. I don't know, but I think that locally, that obviously there was a faction that strongly believed that Kendrick Johnson was murdered, but I think that even among the Black community there, that a lot of people are saying, no, this just, it's like Reverend Rose said, this just doesn't add up. And it might have, it probably wouldn't have been as bad had the outside actors not kept inflaming it. And, like I said, some of the stuff that I guess was on CNN, they kept fanning the flames, and the Ebony article, and, really anything that I Googled at first, it had I not, gone down there or gone up there and just done the story myself, I'd have said, well, this is really weird, but because you can just it was all just innuendo, though. It was all every story that you read fell back on the racial history in Valdosta, and the lynchings of 50, 60, 70 years ago, all of which is terrible, but it really, I never thought Brian Bell should be held responsible for what happened to Emmett Till, and that's basically the storyline that they are trying to construct along the way. Every case is different, but they always want to fall back on the narrative. It's just a southern redneck town that is going to protect, has that still plantation mentality, and everybody is corrupt. The police chief and everybody on up, and that no matter what happens, they're not going to convict a white person of killing a Black person. And I think that would have been a legitimate case to make in 1960, but I don't think it was quite the case in 2014.
By the time Finding Kendrick Johnson was in production, much of the support the Johnsons once had was nowhere to be found. Reverend Floyd Rose, once by their side for every rally, has since become an enemy of the Johnsons. In a deposition of Kenneth Johnson, he says that Rose, quote, ain't for the people. People say he's done a lot of great things, but we don't see it that way. In other reports, he's elaborated on this opinion. The following information is from the same deposition, paraphrased. Kenneth believes that Rose kept the donor of the $10,000 reward fund anonymous to intentionally deceive them after he found out the person who put up the reward was named Roy Taylor. Kenneth implied Roy was related to Wes Taylor and the aforementioned Taylor girls who found the body. Given his stance that they were involved in the cover-up done by the school, this made Rose part of the cover-up as well. When asked about Rose putting up his house to bail Jackie out of jail after she was arrested outside the courthouse, Kenneth said they never wanted him to do that. They felt it was a ploy to get close to them, so that he could either use their information against them or intercept leads and ensure they don't reach the family or authorities. Lee Touchton also provided some insight on this subject.
Reverend Rose and a local businessman offered a reward of $10,000. And the Johnsons had their attorney call up Reverend Rose and say, we want you to discontinue this reward. And they would never give a reason why. They just said they didn't want it, and other just total weirdness, in my opinion. But to me, it just seemed like anytime money was given to the Johnsons, and at this point they had GoFundMes, Cash Apps, Venmos, a post office box. They were going to rallies around the country where there were other young Black people that had lost their lives in suspicious circumstances. I'm sure some was police brutality, but I'm sure some was, another just tragic incident. But they would go there, tell their story, pass the hat, and they told the Bell's attorneys in the depositions that they lived for 2 years on donations. They quit their jobs. They lived for 2 years on donations. And we gave money, I gave money, and we never saw them do anything with the money except pay their own expenses. So when you have people acting like that, it should give most people a red flag and say, hey, this is not on the up and up. It's not honest behavior. You don't take money for a reward and then go pay your living expenses with it. So that was it for me.
Two of the Johnsons' biggest supporters were their lawyers, but neither Shaveen King nor Benjamin Crump were involved in the documentary. Shaveen King stopped working for the Johnsons shortly after their first lawsuit. The one for $100 million with 38 defendants fell apart. Benjamin Crump, as we discussed, stopped working for them after the FBI closed their investigation. Marcus Coleman was one of their longest-reigning advocates, but he has been absent since 2021, shortly after the false confession tape was released. Thank you for listening. Our investigation will continue in our next and final episode of The Boy in the Mat.